Hello there, I'm Andrew, Oscar Zulu 5 Echo, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Flexradio and also about our Beverage antenna. Now, I'm located in my home. This is the remote operation, and you're seeing the screens which show the Flexradio here, and the control system for the station is over there. So, at the moment, we're listening to the sound of this radio with it's placed in the transverter position, which means that essentially there is no antenna connected to the radio, and it has a noise level, a noise floor of about minus 130. If you look at the meter here, this is the one that I'm actually going to be using because the stuff down here is not as easy to observe. So it says that we have a minus 113 dBm, which is possibly not as good as it could be. But if you look over here at the antenna settings, I'm using no preamplifier. That's zero gain preamplifier, and as I say, we've got no antenna connected at the moment. Now I'm going to go to 5,500 5.5 megahertz, and there's a specific reason for that, because most people think that a Beverage antenna is only of use on the very low bands, on 160 or 80 meters, but actually I've used it a lot of other places, and this is a kind of compromise frequency. It's about around the 60 meter band, and it's during the day, so we wouldn't have much chance of finding interesting signals on 80 or 160. So I chose to do the demonstration here, and this frequency, if I'm lucky, is not occupied at the moment. So I'm now going to put on the Beverage antenna, and the Beverage antenna is pointing towards the southwest at the moment, and I put on the Beverage antenna, and you see the noise goes up a little bit, not very much. It's now saying 108 dBm, if you can see it on the screen here. And if I go back to the transverter, it's minus 113. So it's not too noisy here. And I'm listening on the Beverage. And remember, our Beverage antenna is about 900 meters away from the shack, so we have a preamplifier on it because it has to compensate for the coax loss over that distance. But what's interesting, if we now go back to the transverter setting, where we're just noticing the degree of noise with no antenna connected, and then if I change the preamplifier setting here, and I put up the, for example, put up the power to that's plus 40 dBs. Now, what this noise means is difficult. The amplification is picking up some kind of signals, but what they are representing is difficult to know. It seems like pretty much absolute silence when I have no preamplifier, and then with 40 dBs or even with 20 dBs there's some kind of activity, but it's way down, minus 125 dBm. So these are signals which are essentially inaudible, but the preamplifier pulls them up. So if we start with this setting, which is what Flexradio actually recommend for operating on the lower frequencies, but the preamplifier is more relevant when you get up into the very high frequencies. So for this demonstration, I'll leave it on zero gain. So we now go back to the Beverage antenna, and we can see it's quite a quiet band. Now we're lucky. The reason I chose this frequency is that on 5.505 there is a weather station in Ireland, which is almost due west from our location in Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, and you can hear that if I put it on exactly 5:05, then we have a very good clear copy. We're showing a strength of about 5 and 6 to 7, which is not bad. And then we can check the beverage. Now the beverage antenna is over here, and I can change the direction from, this was the southwest, which is roughly towards Ireland, but even using the northwest, which is our short path to America, it's not too bad. It's not quite as strong. About 6 to 7
degrees, 15 knots, gusting 25 knots. Visibility 10 kilometers or more. No
and there's a certain degree of QSB. It's fading in and out.
2,000 feet.
So if we now listen in the other direction, we're using a very slow AGC. You see, it's considerably quieter on the back of the beverage, and even more quiet on the side of the beverage. But when we go to the southwest, it's quite clear.
Copenhagen Kastrup at 1320 Zulu.
Now, if we go back
220 degrees,
to a clear frequency, and then instead of listening on the beverage, we choose a multi-band antenna that we have up at about it's up at about 60 feet, and if we listen on we see it's not really a tuned antenna for this band, but it works quite well, and you can see the difference in the noise level. Here it's 108 dBm, and if I go to the beverage, it is pretty much the same. And the comparison I'm trying to make is, normally I would like to show a vertical against the beverage, because the vertical polarization would be different, but these are both horizontally polarized antennas. So if I now go to the interesting frequency, the 505, and you can see that the strength here is about strength 6, and on the beverage it is
visibility 3,500 meters.
With QSB it's difficult to judge, but it's around 5 and 5 and 6. So if I now use the Flexradio's diversity setting, which means, because we've got in this model of the Flex, which is the 6700, it has two completely separate radios in fact. So I'm going to put in diversity. Now, if you're listening in stereo, at the moment I've put the signal in the middle, so it's in the center. When I go to diversity, I've put the beverage antenna is on the left channel, which you can see here, and the antenna 1, which is the multiband antenna, is on the right. So you will notice when you hear if you hear it in stereo, especially on headphones, you will notice that the voice moves from side to side in the sound picture. I'll leave you to listen for a few seconds.
Oslo Gardermoen at 1320 Zulu. 150 degrees, 5 knots. Cabo Pro, temperature 2, dew point -6. 1000, May 6. Repeating, Copenhagen Kastrup, Metroport, Copenhagen Kastrup at 1320 Zulu. Wind 220 degrees.
I find it very, very interesting to hear the way it subtly moves from side to side in the sound picture. And at the same time, I have to point out that if this was a vertical antenna against the beverage, the difference would be even more noticeable. But as with all these experiments, you can never truly expect to find the correct combination every time you hear a signal. But believe me, listening on the Beverage makes a huge difference in many situations. Now, if we go back to the Beverage with no signal applied, so I'm now going to take off the diversity and go down to a clear frequency, and then there we are on a clear frequency, and you can see that the noise level towards the southwest is minus 108 dBm. Now if I go to the northwest, it's 105, so it's somewhat different. And if I go on the short path to Japan, it's very quiet indeed, but there are still signals. Now this antenna is working, but the noise floor is gone down. And if I go to the southeast, it's very quiet. Now there could be a good explanation of this. Now the northwest, that's short path to America, very quiet. But if I go to the southwest, it's a bit noisier, and this is because we have a village just about a kilometer to the southwest. And what I'd like to do as a last demonstration here is to go back to the signal and go back to the diversity setting. So here we have the signal. I'm not exactly on the frequency. We're so privileged with this particular version of the Flex that we do have the GPS completely controlling the frequency of this radio. So when it says 5.505.000, that is exactly where we are. There are 9 or 10 satellites keeping us on the frequency, which is terribly reassuring, don't you think? But if I now change the direction of the antenna, you can hear that it goes out as the AGC recovers, and it goes out, and the AGC recovers, goes out, and the AGC. And then just to finish this off, should we be using the preamplifiers? Now, the preamplifier is an interesting concept because we're used to it in the old-fashioned radios, the superhet radios that we've known since, I think, about 1920. They've been making them, where the actual preamplification is filtered. In other words, you are not amplifying all the frequencies that the receiver can receive. On this radio, we are actually amplifying a lot of frequencies. So we're not using any amplification at the moment, but if I put it on a little bit, it seems to put up the signal, but maybe it doesn't really help because the noise is going up about the same. So if I now put the full 40 dBs, what I find interesting is that we're tempted to just put all the amplification on there, and then we have a serious risk of problems because of loud stations in the neighborhood. But if I put it down So I don't know if this is an understandable and interesting demonstration, but it has certainly surprised me that the amplifier, the preamplifier, seems to be something we have to consider using carefully and not just going for the maximum gain, because it doesn't really make any difference in this quiet area of frequency, and possibly would give problems on 40 meters or even on 80 meters at some time. So that's the story from Oscar Zulu 5 Echo. I'm Andrew, and I hope you enjoyed this little demonstration. Thanks a lot.
Hamburg, forecast. Hamburg, valid from the 2nd.